Well, lots to be excited about if you're a Carolina Hurricanes fan these days. After all, Canes have jumped off to a 2-game lead versus the New Jersey Devils as they head back to the Rock for games 3 and 4. Chicago Wolves, led by a number of Canes' top prospects, have returned to the playoffs after missing last year. And much ballyhooed Canes phenom Alexander Nikishin is practicing with the team, getting ready to jump into the Canes lineup when called upon. Joining me to talk about that and more, stormTracker insiders Aaron Manning and Katie Bartlett, and we have a special guest, Carolina Hurricanes TV analyst Shane Willis. Howdy, everybody.
Morning.
Hi there.
Okay, so I thought we'd talk for just a couple of minutes about the end of the season. The Hurricanes basically decided to rest a number of players. They didn't fight hard to move up in the standings, which I think would have been a smart move to give them home ice advantage, but they decided to go with some of the youngsters. What did we think about that, and what did we see in some of these young players? Shane, you want to kick it off?
I loved it. I think it was the right move. And again, I have a little bit more of an inside track because I think going into the playoffs and no matter who you're facing, home ice is extremely important. But more importantly, health is even more important. And we've seen over the past few years, the teams that make a deep run and the ones that hoist the Stanley Cup are healthy teams. And Rod Brind'Amour is a competitor, and he is not a guy that wants to take anybody out, and players don't want to come out. But when you're dealing with situations as this team was and looking ahead, the most important thing is game one. You knew you had home ice in round one, and I think that gave them the flexibility to pull guys out and say, we're looking at a bigger goal here, something that's a lot bigger than playing in 2 final games and maybe getting past Toronto to have home ice. You weren't going to catch the Capitals, and I don't think anybody thinks that the Montreal Canadiens are going to knock out the Capitals. So the rest was important. Health, even more important of your top-end players that were able to rest for that last week.
Aaron, thoughts?
Well, I have to agree, and it was so much fun to see the kids. I think that I was really impressed with Bradley Nadeau's release. Good heavens. I mean, that shot is something else. It just, those are the kinds of things that if you're not able to watch the Wolves on a regular basis, you don't get to see all the things that they're doing down there. You don't get to see how these guys are doing. So it's always fun. And I think that matters more, like you said, than the wins and losses in a couple of last season games that are already pretty meaningless as far as achieving any goals for the Canes. So I have to agree. And then the rest, like you said, too, it's that was a question I had for you for later, but we'll get back to that. So,
any further thoughts, Katie?
Obviously, we've heard a ton about Morrow and Nikishin. We're super excited about them. Really impressed me with his speed, the way he was able to control the puck and move it out of his zone efficiently, and even sometimes into the offensive zone. So it's encouraging to know that it's not just those two guys on the back end that we have in the system, but there are others that could potentially come up and contribute in the future. So he was the one that pleasantly surprised me because I'd heard about all of the others and been familiar with their game, but I was not familiar with him.
Dominic Fonsori to me is he's incredible. He played 19 minutes average in the 2 games he played. He's not a big player, but boy, he's smart out there and he's quick. And the other guy that I think really did well was Skylar Brind'Amour. He was awesome in the face-off dot. And I thought he surprised a lot of people. I know a lot of folks on X were saying, hey, come on, what's with Brind'Amour? But I thought he held up quite nicely, and he's had a great season in Chicago as well. So kind of fun to see those guys. Sometimes you don't know much about them, and we got a chance to see them firsthand with the Canes. Okay, so let's move on to the playoffs. And let's talk a little bit about the forward crew for a minute. There's some things there I thought we could touch on. One of them was let's look at the Staal line for a minute. Those guys obviously are always critical to the Canes' success. First game, Logan Stankoven had a couple of goals. What do we see from them? Do we think they can do more? Where do we see them in the series going forward? Shane, thoughts?
Vital. I mean, this line is extremely vital. You saw it in game 1 with 2 goals from Stankoven. In game 2, I look at it as where you talk about leadership with this group because the first period, was not their best, top to bottom, not just that line. And Jordan Martinook talked about it with Hannah Yates in between periods. And anytime you hear either Jordan Martinook or Jordan Staal talk about a bad period, look out, because you know they're going to be the line that starts the second period, and they're going to look at the bench and play, this is now how we're going to play. So leadership standpoint, you cannot match what these guys do on a nightly basis. And then the effort level of Jordan Martinook and what he meant to that game, not only scoring shorthanded the way he did, but that entire penalty kill. And he made a great quote after the game saying the playoffs are about stepping outside of your box and really doing things you don't like to do. No one wants to get in front of a shot that's coming 100 miles an hour.
Yeah,
but he laid out 2 or 3 times, throwing his body around to make sure that puck didn't get to Freddie Anderson. And that is the difference between elite level players and teams that make it to Stanley Cups and the ones that don't. It's the ones that are willing to do that. And that line really brings it to the table on a nightly basis. And for a young player like Logan Stankoven, what a way to learn from 2 players sitting beside you, knowing this is how we have to do it. And he is learning vital pieces besides scoring some big goals right now. And I talked with Trip Tracy about it the other day, saying that was a little bit like my career. You know, I had the benefit of playing with Rod Brind'Amour and Martin Jelena. And all I had to do was follow their lead, the way they worked, their effort level. Obviously, their skill was there as well. But there were nights I remember being a young player and you're having that fatigue factor and everything, and all you have to do is look to your right, and Rod's looking at you saying, are you ready? And your answer better be yes, because they're dragging you into the fight each and every night. I think those 2 players do that with Stankoven right now.
Yeah, no question. Now, Katie, you had some very interesting information off Hockey Stat. What did you find out about these guys?
Well, it's interesting because if you spend any time on X looking at different posts, you see the Hockey Stat cards. And if you just go by those cards, it looked like Jordan Staal had an awful game. He was at the bottom of the card for the Hurricanes while Martinook was at the top. And that's very unusual to have guys on the same line so far apart. When you dig into it, it just had to do with the fact that he was dinged for that one penalty that was called on him. And the fact that he lost faceoffs, because Hischier, you got to give credit to Hischier. Hischier is really good in the faceoff dot, and he won a lot of faceoffs. You take that out, and he jumps from the bottom of the stat card up to the top of the stat card. Right. So you can't take those types of things as gospel. They're an interesting tool. You can learn a lot from them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, how many points did Hischier and his line put on the board? You know, they didn't. They didn't score. They had to split up. In fact, they had to split up Bratt from Hischier in order to create any kind of offensive opportunity for the Devils. Because unfortunately, the boat the Devils are in right now is they are limited on offense because of who's not in their lineup currently. And so Staal and his line made a huge difference in preventing the other team from getting on the board. And so, you can look at the stats all you want, but at the end of the day, you dig into it and you see that Jordan Staal and his line have so many more intangibles that you can't quantify in a stat sheet.
Yeah. It's a great point, Katie. And the one point now as you go into New Jersey is Sheldon Keefe will now get his matchups. So does this line become more offensive and dynamic because Jordan Martinook loves playing against the Devils? Does Jordan Staal, as you talk about those numbers, do they go up because he's not facing Hischier anymore? Maybe he's getting another centerman and he's dominating in the faceoff circle. So that line's going to be real key in Game 3 as Keefe gets his matchups to where he thinks benefits his team. And I don't think he's going to put Hischier on the ice with Staal. I could be wrong, but I think he tries to shake things up to avoid that line.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right, Shayne. And for sure, Martinook seems to have the Devil's number. As we know, he seems to, what do you call him? Martinook Gretzky, Aaron, I think is your nickname.
That was the comment from last year, the famous broadcast call. All of a sudden, he's Wayne Gretzky and he scores. That was such a classic moment. So, he's Gretzky Martinook, Mm-hmm.
Well, he definitely takes his game to another level. And I think the good news about this game was that, it wasn't, I don't think it was Jordan's best game. And again, he struggled a little bit in the faceoff dot. And if he can get back to what we normally see with him, that's going to help a lot in terms of possession time for the Hurricanes. So I think that's good news. So let's talk about another line. And this line we've had high hopes for. Big line. You've got Taylor Hall, you've got Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and of course Andrei Svechnikov. We had huge high hopes for these guys. starting to show a little bit. Shayne, what are you thinking about these guys?
The obvious in my mind would be you need more. And, those guys will tell you the same thing. If you ask them, they're like, we have to be better. We have to give more. We have to create more chances in the offensive zone. The one area where I think I liked them more in game one, where I thought they struggled in game two, was more the rhythm of the game. And if you go back, and every time I talk to Rod, he always makes this comment, go back and watch. The hard part for an offensive player like Taylor Hall and Andrei Svechnikov is breaking up the rhythm of your shifts 5-on-5. And they come over the boards, they're playing 5-on-5, all of a sudden there's a penalty. So now the line gets broken up. Svech is on the first power play unit. The other two guys are on the second power play unit, which wasn't getting many touches. Then the Staal line comes out. Then the Aho line. Now you're back to the Kotkaniemi line again. And there were times in the second period where I didn't see him for 5 minutes because of the calls going back and forth. I think that really affected that line last game. So going into game three, and I say this all the time, this team is dynamic 5-on-5. If they can stay there, I'm not even worried about the power plays at this point. That allows this line to utilize their speed. Now, will they get a tougher matchup in New Jersey? I go back to that again because you may see Sheldon Keefe put Hischier's line with Bratt against that line.
Yeah.
So don't get caught up again of, they didn't get on the score sheet tonight. They may be called upon to be more defensive if that line is their matchup. So we always want goals, and that line has enough skill to do it. I really look at the rhythm part of it because being an offensive guy myself, I was on the power play, but I didn't kill penalties. So if we kept taking penalties, I just sat on the bench.
Yeah.
And you finally get back out there. Now you're trying to get back into the game. I really felt the rhythm of the game for the Kotkaniemi line struggled in game two. But my hopes are still high that they are a big factor, not only in this series, but as this team continues to move through the playoffs.
Yeah, and Aaron, now you are a big Jesperi Kotkaniemi fan.
Sure.
How are you feeling about his play so far, what you've seen in the first two games?
I think that from the time he first played in a playoff game at the age of 19, the thing that Kotkaniemi has loved about the playoffs is the physicality and being able to be part of the hitting parade, because during the regular season, he's said before, I can't go around doing that because it takes me out of the play too much, if I'm, delivering big hits all the time. And in the playoffs, it's a different animal. Everybody on the line has to be responsible for hitting. And, I think I mentioned that line in particular, last game two, Svech had 4 hits and KK had 5, so 9 between them, right. And Taylor Hall didn't have to have any. There wasn't a need for it. So it's not like that's what the bad part about seeing those hit numbers means that they didn't have the puck. So that's where you gotta, they're hitting to get the puck back. So, but at least it's working and it's effective in helping to do that. So that's what you want to see when they don't have it, when they play away from the puck, when the other team has the puck. That's what you want to see from them. And I really like Svechnikov on that line because we talked a little bit about his struggles this season. This has been a down year for him.
Yes.
He's playing very simple. To me, it seems like he's playing a much more simple, direct game in these first 2 games of the season. Of the playoff season.
Yeah.
I want to see that continue with him. I want to see that because, that's where he's going to find his biggest success. It's not the fancy playmaking. It's not the East-West game. But if he's just playing that simple, direct hockey with a lot of physicality involved, I think that it brings out the best version of Andrei Svechnikov. And we really need that. We really do in the playoffs.
Now, one question, speaking of Svech, one question that a lot of folks are asking is, what's the issue with Markstrom with the Svech? And Shayne, what are you thinking about that? That seems to be quite a little duel going on.
We have fielded that question a lot lately, and I go back. I don't remember in game 1 or game 2 where there was a bump where they ran into each other, anything. And I was trying to think back into the season. I don't remember it if Markstrom is just losing his temper because of Svech being around the net. But I've not seen anything that jumps off the page to know why Jacob Markstrom keeps going after Andre.
Yeah.
Well, very noticeable.
Yeah, and from Andre's perspective, this is great. If he can get Markstrom off his game, and that's going to be critical. Markstrom, Shayne, when we talked a lot about, going up against the Devils, one of the things we talked about was Jacob Markstrom. He's that wild card. He's a guy that when he is on his game and is hot, he is tough. He's extremely tough. And he made a lot of great saves in these first 2 games. So you've got to get him off his game. And I think what Svech is doing is right on cue. Just get in his face and hopefully maybe tip a few in while you're at it. So
yeah, he was good in both game one and game two, and in game two, he doesn't get any spotlight because of how great Freddie Anderson was at the other end.
Yeah.
So Markstrom has been good for them. There's no question that he'll start game three. It's not they go down 0-2, and the worst scenario for a coach is, do I change my goalie now? What do I do? And I think he's held them in this series to keep them even close in either one of those games.
Yeah, I don't see any possible way that he's not in game three for sure. Okay, so one of the lines that we've talked a little bit about is this fourth line, and we were really interested in the fourth line. You've got some size. You've got Carrier back now, and he's a guy that we're really excited about because, lots of experience in the playoffs, had some great success with Vegas and played a very big role there. And as we've learned, a lot of folks are pretty complimentary about that. And you've got Eric Robinson, who had a career year. So you've got a couple of guys that can get out, play heavy. And we were quite surprised to see Jack Roslovic moving into that center spot. At first glance, we thought, gee, that doesn't make sense. And then took a little step back and started to look at some stats. Aaron, you saw something on the Roslovic thing that I thought was interesting when they made the decision to go to him. What did you see?
Well, the two main things that I hadn't thought about before, because we were talking about we were looking at his defensive stats and saying, are they going to want to put him in right away in the playoffs or not? But his role on the second unit on the power play is really hard to replace. And then the fact that he's the only right-handed center on the team, or right draw center on the team. So they need someone who's going to win faceoffs on that side. And they need, he's got, I think you had his stats, Tom, at 54.1%.
Yeah, that's
on draws.
So
this
year. Yeah.
That's something that you don't want to just set that aside and say, well, we don't need that, because you do need that. So, I could see them making adjustments as the series goes on if they need to. But I think that I wasn't thinking about those things. And then once he started, I thought, well, gosh, yeah, they would have to put someone else on that second unit power play, and they would have to have someone. They don't have anyone else who's taking right draws. So that's probably the reason the decision was made.
Shayne, your thoughts?
Yeah, you're exactly right. As I talked to Rod about it, and not an easy decision. It's kind of a luxury to have a full roster. This team hasn't seen this over the past couple of years. But not only the luxury to have a full roster, but to have guys who are playing as well as Mark Jankowski was for this team, and how hard it is for Rod to have that conversation saying, I'm going to take you out and put Jack Roslovic in. But your 2 points are exactly right. One, because he's right-handed and that power play unit. It's tough to give up a guy who's got 20 goals, right?
Yeah.
It's tough to take a guy out of the lineup. When it comes to playoffs, you have to score, and power plays are extremely important. So right now it has worked, and as we go into New Jersey, I go back to what I talked about earlier. Look at matchups, especially in Game 3. I would assume Rod does not change anything.
Yeah.
But if New Jersey exploits a matchup with Roslovic at center with one of their lines, do we see Jankowski, who's bigger and stronger, coming in Game 4 to try and handle that matchup in a different way?
Mm-hmm.
Katie, what are your thoughts on that fourth unit?
Yeah, they've been. I don't know that I have a whole lot new to add. Definitely would like to see Jankowski at some point. I think he's played well enough for the Canes that he'll get a look at eventually. But you don't fix what ain't broke.
Agreed.
Well, one thing about Roslovic, and he had I think a career year in the faceoff dot. We talked a lot about his challenges in the faceoff dot previously this year, but he has really been firing the puck. He brings an offensive spin to that line as well. And just by virtue of them being able to keep play in the offensive zone and get chances as a fourth line is fantastic. So far I'm with everybody on this, but I do think we'll see Mark Jankowski at some point as we move into the playoffs. And that will give them a very substantially sizable line, adding Jankowski to Robinson, and of course Carrier. So that's exciting stuff. And as you say, rightfully, playoffs, it's a great luxury to have. I think the Canes going into this playoff round are in pretty darn good shape from a health perspective. So here's an exciting thing. The Canes have done this without much from the top line. So we've got Aho and Blake and of course Jarvis out there, and we saw some great play from them as the season wound down, but haven't seen much so far. Shayne, thoughts?
Still creating, still generating. Obviously, their shift led to the first goal with Gostisbehere last game and game 2 to tie it in the second period. I think they continue to control the puck in different plays. I think, again, I go back to the word of matchups. What does that end up being for this line in New Jersey? And does it become a better fit for them or maybe even a harder fit? But those are the scenarios I think a lot of people forget to look at is when we look at those matchups. Do they want more? Without a doubt. I think they've kind of just taken a step back into where they were for a few weeks where they're creating and they're just not finding the back of the net. But as we know with offensive players, they get one or two early in a game, they could really take off and explode. And I almost look at moments. There's never going to be a game, whether you're in the first round against a team that you're supposed to beat or as the playoffs get longer, how difficult it is to score, even for top lines to create and make those goals happen. So I would be more concerned, I think we talked about this before, if they weren't generating opportunities. Okay. And, Katie would know best, going into the stats of how many high danger chances they had and looking at game 1 and game 2. I get those things fed to me through my ears, so I don't have to study as much when I'm on TV. But I've liked the way they played. They're going to compete on a nightly basis. And when it comes down to a moment when the game is on the line, if it's tied, maybe you're down 1, the cream rises to the top, and we know what Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis do in those type of moments if it gets late in the game or even to overtime.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting discussion point we've had this year. Seth Jarvis, of course, we really believe he's doing what we would expect him to do. Both ends of the rink defensively, and of course he gets that empty netter. But sometimes we think that we should see more from Sebastian Aho. He had no shots the other night. Yes, they're getting chances, but he doesn't seem to be the same dominant player that we've seen in these situations in the past. Is that something we're misreading, or, is there something here that we're missing?
No, but I think also teams are queuing in on him way more than they ever have. And
okay, that's true.
As a dynamic elite level player, you have to work harder to find those open spaces. But I think teams, even if they're not getting the initial matchup on a start of a shift, defensemen are jumping off the ice to get a certain guy to match up against Sebastian. And I think you're going to have certain years, and trust me, I've talked to Sebastian a lot, and this guy competes like no other, and he's as frustrated as anybody at certain moments. He knows where his numbers are. He knows where he wants to be. And I think that when you look at this team, and if things progress in a positive light, and if they're having the success to move through the playoffs, Sebastian will have to be a part of that.
Yes.
He will have to score at some points, but it's still by committee, and this team is always going to win as a group. It's never going to be a night where we need Sebastian to score 3 times. You need Sebastian to have 1 assist, maybe 2 assists. You want him to get those shots. I almost go back to the power play. I think this weighs on so many of these offensive guys. If they can get that thing clicking, it kind of just rolls into your game 5-on-5, and we've taken a little bit of a couple of steps back to where it wasn't great again. So that's the pressure point for me going into game 3 is on the road in someone else's building. The penalty kill is phenomenal. I'm not worried about that. Our play needs to score in a key moment. It needs to be a difference maker for this team.
Yes, for sure. And, we did see some light at the end of the tunnel on that a few times. I mean, they were definitely moving the puck extremely well. And I think getting some looks, and that's encouraging. And again, one of the guys that's driving that, and I think he's playing just really strong hockey right now, is Shayne Gostsibehere. Now, Ghost had an interesting thing. He scored that beautiful goal the other night, but he had an interesting thing to say and was talking about actually having some opportunity with the top line. And as you know, they don't see a lot of ice with the top line, just the way it works out on the D-cores. Now, Katie, you had some interesting data on that, looking at Ghost and his time with the top unit. What are you thinking with that?
Well, there's a Hockey Viz chart that shows players' expected goals for and expected goals against when they're on the ice with other players. And so you want to be further right for the expected goals for and further towards the top because they do it inverse for the expected goals against. And Aho and Gostsibehere are in that top right corner where they are creating tons of chances together and not giving up a whole lot of chances as a result. And so I just really found that quote from Ghost particularly interesting, that he doesn't see a lot of time with Aho, because I wonder if perhaps that goal will perhaps encourage more opportunities, especially if there's a face-off in the O-zone, that Rod might take and say, okay, well, let's go ahead and put Ghost and Walker out there with Aho in his line and see what they can generate. Because that goal that line and that D pair put together was really, really important and looked really good. And if you have multiple weapons out there for Aho to feed the puck to, then all the more opportunities there are to get on the score sheet. So I definitely would be curious going forward to see if we see more of Ghost and Aho out there together, since they seem to create a lot of success together.
Well, they do, and you've got, I mean, Ghost, his offense speaks for itself, and we've seen so much from Walker this year, and I don't know how many times he's driven the puck deep into the zone or made, great plays to get good shots, and unfortunately was thwarted. But I think those two guys are playing wonderful hockey for the Canes as a third pairing. It's just incredible. What are your thoughts on those guys, Shayne?
I think they've been very good for the first two games, and I always go back to they're not necessarily trying to match up the D pairing with the offensive unit.
Right.
The D pairing is determined on who's on the other side of the ice. So whoever is getting the Aho line, Tim Gleason is saying, well, I need Slavin and Burns here because it's Heischer in those situations. But I think Walker and Gostisbehere have been the cleanest pairing through the first two games.
Yes.
As far as D-zone exits and the chances against, I think they were, some of the lowest of the six guys, especially in game two. But I love the core of this group. All six of them bring something a little different to the table, but both those guys skate so very well to create chances, and the movement in the offensive zone really helps on the offensive side of things.
Well, yeah, and that brings up an interesting question. When we look at the other two pairs, a lot of concern with Brent Burns. It's another long season for him. We've seen different periods where he wasn't quite as sharp as what we would expect. And we've got Dmitry Orlov and Chatfield, and sometimes Orlov will make incredible plays, and then sometimes he'll do something which we're shaking our head about. What do we think about the rest of the crew? Are they going to be able to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem. I think of the difficult matchups that Brent Burns has to face every night because his partner is Jacob Slavin.
Yeah,
I might walk into the room and be like, can I play with someone else so I don't have to face the best players of the other team? I don't know if that's ever been a conversation, but I know how much he does, because the other factor you have to think of, the two guys that start a penalty kill is Jacob Slavin and Brent Burns. What he does on the penalty kill, there's mistakes made 5-on-5 that's the name of the game. Who makes mistakes? And sometimes they're magnified more than others in certain situations. And it's the same as Dmitry Orlov. No one's going to play as physical as this guy is going to. And when he's on his game, he's up and down the ice and he's shooting. Are there nights when he's off? Without a doubt. Sure. But I think that's when everyone's factoring in. And I know we're going to get to the Nikishin talk in a little bit.
Yes.
But everyone's like, oh, I can't wait. I'm like, this kid has never played the National Hockey League, and you're going to take out a guy who's won a Stanley Cup and put him in the light? That doesn't make sense to me, of where people were assuming this was going to be a quick flip. Besides the fact the head coach is all about the system and where they play. So Orlov and Burns are the guys. And I always look at experience is huge this time of year. And in a moment, is someone going to make a mistake in the first period, second period? Sure. But in a moment when the game is on the line, I'm in complete comfort with the six guys that are sitting to the left on the defensive side of things.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been there all year, and rightfully so. We've talked a lot about Dmitry Orlov this year, and our general consensus is that, for most of the time, he is very, very effective. And sure, he does every once in a while, he'll do something we can't figure out, but that's okay. Chatfield, I think, has been solid all year long. And we've asked both of those guys to do a lot more this year. their minutes are up a couple of minutes more per game. They're playing in the toughest situations, so I think they've come through quite nicely. And I guess where we sit on the decor is that we really want to see that third pair take some of the pressure off those guys. They can play more ice. I mean, when Sean Walker was playing with Philadelphia, and I think that was his best year to date, he was playing close to 20 minutes a game. So he can definitely eat up the minutes. But let's talk about Alexander Nikishin for a minute. So Alex in with the Canes, he's working out with them. We loved the whole kind of saga of getting him over and signing him. We were just delighted. And I think, you look at a guy like this and all you can think of is we can't wait to see him on the ice. But rightfully so, as you said, and I think we agree, Shayne, that he's got to kind of work into this. And there have been some rumors that he may end up going to Chicago for a game. Not sure where that sits, and we'll maybe get your feedback on that. But here's a guy that for the future of the Canes is going to be huge. And if there's injuries, I would expect we might see him. But until such time, as you rightfully say, and I think this is probably the direction we'll see, is that the 6 guys who've earned the right all year long and have brought the Canes to where they are will continue to do just that. And any further thoughts on that, Shayne?
Well, yeah, I have a lot. I hate to break people's hearts all the time when I get information. But let's go into the number one problem of a player who's going to try and learn Rod Brind'Amour's system. Tremendous player. Let me start there. Yeah. This guy on the ice is big. He can skate, and he has a heavy, heavy shot. I've watched him in practice. So skill level, let's be excited. Let's be ready to see this guy one day put this jersey on. Now, from a reality standpoint, the first thing, and Eric Tulsky clarified a little bit yesterday, saying the player is not officially signed. Yeah. They've agreed to terms, but he is not signed. So technically he cannot even play for Chicago or for us being agreed to terms. A contract has to be signed, which hasn't happened yet. I think there's a lot of behind-the-scenes paperwork that's still being done when it comes to visas and those type of things. So that's one hurdle. The second hurdle, which I think is major, and I enjoyed watching it because I love seeing Rod talk to the new guys, but maybe a negative factor of when it comes to English. Yeah, so when you're going to try and learn a system and play in the National Hockey League, but you don't speak English, it's hard. And I didn't realize that. Everyone always talked about a player coming over to the U.S. to play, and they talk about how hard it is for him. I'm like, how hard is it? It can't be any easier. Until I went to Europe, and I played in Switzerland, no one spoke English, right? And you figure out, you're like, okay, I feel bad because I always made fun of those guys. Why didn't they figure things out faster? So the English factor is one, to learn the system, but it's a difficult system to play. He has the skill level and ability to skate and play in the system, but it will take time. And there's nothing worse that if you're going to throw a young kid, and he is a kid, in a situation that's set for failure. You don't want to see that for any player to start his career. And I still think, because people are like, oh, if someone gets hurt, I'm pretty sure, and Tom, we've talked about this guy before, Scott Morrow would have something to say about who goes in the lineup next, as he plays for the Wolves in the playoffs right now as well. So extreme excitement for Nikishin to be a Carolina Hurricanes player. I just like to dial things back, saying it's probably not going to be in this playoffs unless something drastic happens.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he brings, as you said, rightfully so, he brings size, which is something that as these series get tougher and playing in a lot of foreign rinks, because, of course, it looks like after this series, the Canes may be losing a home ice advantage in these series. Maybe, at some point we might see him because of that. But I tend to agree with you too, Shayne, that we'd love to see him, but let's not do something that doesn't make sense for the team or for the player, for sure. Again, our excitement on Nikishin's huge, so we'll keep tracking that one very, very closely. I was kind of hoping he would play with the Wolves at the end of the season. There was a lot of discussion on that, and I had all set to.
That could still happen if a contract gets signed and the paperwork's all where it needs to be. You could see him with the Chicago Wolves if they're able to move on out of the first round. Or here, like you said, if there's enough injuries, and some of the best stories are, all of a sudden some guy becomes a playoff hero because he gets thrown into the fire. I'm not saying this guy's got enough skill level that it could happen.
Yes.
But it would take some of those major things to happen before he gets in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fortunate thing, too, of course, is that he's got some fellow countrymen who are there with him, and that makes a big difference. Now, Katie, you recall a certain player that joined the Avs at some point and made quite a splash, and you can maybe talk about that.
I mean, just for a moment, I'm originally from Colorado, Shayne, in case you didn't know, and so I started as an Avs fan before I moved out here to the Carolinas, and have been following them. And of course, Cale Makar made his big debut with the Avs, coming straight out of the NCAA playoffs and coming in and scoring a big goal. So, two different types of defensemen, not expecting them to be the same type of player at all. But for the storylines, it would be fun to have something along those lines where he can come in I think it was a game 5 against Calgary that Makar came in and scored his big goal. So it'd be very, very fun to see something similar along those lines with Nikishin. But like we said before, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we would like to see our 6 guys stay our 6 guys and continue on being strong throughout the playoffs.
That's some of the best storylines that always come out of the playoffs in moments like that. I think, and didn't know you were an Avs fan before, but you had to. I mean, being from there, I was watching the excitement, kind of just the feeling I had last night watching Gabriel Landeskog step onto the ice in that building. I mean, it was electric, and I think you know what it takes as a player. You know what it takes to not only get to the National Hockey League, but to face an injury like he did, to not play for 3 years, to continue to grind away. What a moment for him and his family, and that building as a whole. It's probably one of those things that are like, it might have took too much out of the team knowing that and losing a tight game like that. So I expect them to bounce back. But what a moment in Colorado last night.
Yeah, that's exciting. And now, speaking of Russians jumping into lineups, of course, Aaron, you had the thrill with Ivan Demidov joining the Habs. Aaron also a Habs fan. So yes, we've seen some very interesting starts for some of these players.
That's actually.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just really quick. Just really quickly, because I know we're short on time. That does kind of go back to Shayne's point, though, because Demidov speaks English very well, and he even speaks a little French. But he is being a little bit in these early 2 games. He's been very overwhelmed by the moment. The playoffs are huge, and it's a lot when you're coming in and you've only played a couple of games with the team, and then all of a sudden, guess what? We get to kill each other out here now. It's a lot for a young player to adjust to. So it just kind of, when you were talking, I was thinking, we don't want that situation for Nikishin if we don't have to have it. So.
Well, and Demidov is a younger player, so Nikishin has a bit more experience, which is good.
Yeah.
Now, I want to hit one more thing, if we can, with you, Shayne, before you head off, and that's the goaltending situation. And we've been ecstatic with Freddie's play; he's just been lights out. But we're wondering, when are we going to see Piotr?
It's a great question, and water cooler talk for the last few days, going into game 2. I was set on Piotr. I'm like, I need to watch Piotr play. I want to keep the back and forth going, because I'm looking further down the road. I'm expecting his team to move on. I'm expecting them to move deep into these playoffs. So it's hard, and that's why they alternate during the season. And the playoffs are even harder. Even though you get a day off, I like to keep everybody fresh. Now, obviously, we leave for New Jersey today, where it's a 2-day break.
Yes.
I'm going to assume going into game 3, it's going to be hard to take Freddie out because of what he just did.
Yeah.
But is the fact that game 4 is less than 48 hours afterwards that you go to Piotr in game 4, just for the rest factor, right? Because 48 hours, then it's Tuesday again. If you go Piotr in game 4, whichever way it goes, you either close the series out if you've won game 3, or you're coming back home with a very fresh Freddie Anderson. So I would say game 3 stays the course with Freddie. Game 4 will be the harder conversation for Rod and Paul Schoenfelder of what do we do now. It's hard. I mean, as a head coach, it's hard that a guy that's playing like he did in game 1 and 2 to say, I'm going to go to the other guy. Especially right now. You have everything's on the line now, right? To win or lose and move on. But I do believe Piotr will be used at some point, whether it turns into a back and forth or it's that one game to give Freddie an extra 3 days off. Because I think if you go back to stats, I'm not a big stats guy, but if you looked into the window of Freddie's win-losses after 3 days rest or
Yes.
2 days rest or just one, what is the difference? And that plays a factor. You're going to play the analytical role of saying, Freddie is unbeaten when he gets 3 days off.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, I'm going to give him 3 days off every week. So he's ready to go. I think I'm at my best when I get 3 days off. My boss hasn't bought into that yet, though. So
yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think we agree. For sure, we want to see Piotr. I think last year some of us were not happy. We didn't see more of him in the playoffs and earlier, and we think that that kind of weighed heavy on Freddie, and we saw kind of how it ended.
Well, and the other factor, when you look at Piotr, you can't have him sit too long.
Right.
And then throw him in and expect him to be sharp. You have to get him some reps. You have to get him into a game. So my focus for him would probably be game 4. But again, that's no inside knowledge from my side. I just think it would be a good spot to put him in. You know, closes out the series. He gives them another little boost if we've won game 3. But on the flip side, if you happen to drop game 3 and then you throw him in, there's a lot of pressure. Because if he loses, series is tied at 2.
Yeah, and the other thing, just as we wrap this point up, the other thing is he's earned the right. He carried the load a lot this year. Freddie being out for significant.
He had the last couple of weeks he was off, and he would tell you, and he was frustrated. He was fighting it, but I agree with you. He's dynamic, and I love his enthusiasm. I love his energy when he's in there, and he is really shown in big moments. And I said, I wish New Jersey had a Russian goalie because he dominates those guys at the other end. If it's Shesterkin, he'd probably play the whole Florida series because he beats Bob all the time.
Yeah, good point.
Well, he definitely has an ability to make incredible saves. He's phenomenal in high danger chances, as we know. He's one of the best, and he had that stretch. I don't know if you recall. He had the 4 games where he was lights out. He had a .99 goals against average and some kind of ridiculous save percentage. So he's shown he can do it. But yeah, agree with you. Hey, I know you got to run, Shayne. So we're just delighted you could spend time with us, and we'll certainly make sure we do this when you have a little bit more time as the playoffs continue.
Well, I appreciate it. Enjoy joining the show. Enjoy what you all do promoting our team and our brand across the airwaves. And we look forward to game 3 and hopefully another meeting soon when we're in round 2.
Absolutely. You got it.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Shayne.
Thanks.
I wanted to touch base on one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk to with Shayne, and that was this whole concept of a healthy squad coming into the playoffs. And, previous years, we've had those late season injuries. Last year, of course, Jesper Fast went out in the last game. We had some injuries with Svech, and some other problems that have come up. How do we feel about the advantage that this might be giving the Canes this year? Katie, you want to kick it off?
Well, I mean, you start with the advantage of we didn't have anybody injured in the final game of the ones that played, and we definitely protected Aho and Jarvis and Slavin and Blake and some of those guys, which is very good. There's a part of me when we were having that conversation with the Aho line, if perhaps that's part of the slow start for the Aho line, is you sit guys when they're in a particular routine and they're used to doing things a certain way, and now all of a sudden they're not playing. They're the ones in the press box or the ones staying at home while the rest of the crew goes on the road. So I wonder if it's just maybe games 1 and 2 they're shaking off a little rust, and now we'll really get to see the engine start to go. That ghost goal kind of got them started, got that whet their appetite for that, and now that they're back in their routine, we'll see things going. But yeah, you just there's no contest for health, especially when you look across the other side of the aisle at New Jersey and what they're having to deal with, because not only did they start shorthanded and unhealthy with the injuries they had, they have now gained injuries, and especially to their back end. And it's really, in some ways it's impressive that they've been able to hang with the Canes as long as they have because of the guys they're having to have fill in. And I think they've even made some more call-ups. New Jersey's in a pickle, and makes you appreciate even more what the Canes have been blessed with.
Well, I mean, you look at you talk about the injuries there. Brian Dumoulin I don't know, did he end up close to 30 minutes or 27 minutes or something the other night? It was insane. They can't keep doing that. I mean, that's you can do that a game and then you're done. Agree with you. I mean, I don't remember the Canes going into a series with this much depth.
Well, I think that we've, when the real shocking point to me was when they showed the injuries and scratches list at game one, and the only person's name on the list was Jesper Fast, who hasn't played all year.
And he did the horn.
He did the horn, yes. The siren, yes. So, I mean, they are, that is, we want to go back to kind of what Shayne was saying about that too, that you just, there's really no substitute for coming in with a team that's that healthy when you look at the injuries that have riddled other teams and how that's going to be an advantage down the line, And then just coming back real quick to what you said, Katie, about the Aho line, I had one more thought about them too, and that was that just watching the Habs play and the young players, it's amazing that we don't think about this, but this is Jackson Blake's first playoffs, and he's very young, and he's extremely young. So I mean, when you see a whole team full of young kids that are really struggling to figure this out, as I have with the last two times that I've watched the Habs, you kind of look at Jackson Blake a little bit differently, and you say, he's really doing very, very well, even though the line isn't producing. And perhaps some of what we're not seeing from Aho is that Aho may be, trying a little bit to make sure that he's paying extra attention to where Blake is and what's going on. I mean, we saw him get targeted with a big hit. It's just we don't want him to be put in a situation where he's going to be run over. And that's a lot of responsibility for Sebastian Aho to be, looking after a 21-year-old who's in his first playoffs. So that was something we didn't even think about when we talked about that first line. But as they click and get back together, I don't think that's going to be a factor going forward. It's just, those first couple of games are kind of it's a trial by fire for the young players. They've never experienced anything like it. So well,
and that's right. And you take a look at, I really sense that with Blake. It's like just a different animal. Now he's played some significant games in the past for sure.
Oh, sure.
The college ranks and so on. But this is a different animal, and I think you could see in the second game he was starting to get a little bit more confidence. And we know that Blake is really at his best when he's fearless, moving the puck wherever he wants to go, and finding that open man. And he started to show a little bit of that. And I think, frankly, that it's all about what you said, that he's just got to find his way in the playoffs. It's a different game. It's a much tougher game, and we still have to take a step back on that top line and say, are they going to be big enough? And that's a concern we've had for months. And we're going to see as these series go on, how do they fare? And it might be at some point that they're going to have to put someone on that line that brings a little bit more size. So, Brind'Amour is not afraid to make changes, as we know.
Sure. Tying that back into the injury thing, what you were talking about, the remarkably good health that the Canes have started the series with and the playoffs with, the important thing is to keep that going. So if they feel like that top line is going to get targeted too much, especially in the road matchups, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw changes made. So, we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, one of the other things, talking about the depth of the team is that they can manage the minutes a lot better.
Yeah.
I thought, as an example, in previous playoffs, and it might get to this at some point, but the Staal line used to play huge minutes. And you counted on those guys to do that. And again, the first couple of games, not so much. And you've got four lines you can roll. There's not a concern with any of those lines. And you could see Rod, he was rolling them right to the end. He had no concern putting them out over the boards. And I think that's an advantage the Canes have. We've talked so much in the past about a fourth line being a differentiation in the playoffs. It's a big differentiator. And you look at teams that have done well and won the Cup, guess what? They've usually had a pretty darn good fourth line. And, as we watch the playoffs, it's these third and fourth liners that, seem to show up on the score sheet. It's such a different game because so much attention is paid to the top players. You've got matchups on them in home ice. You've got your top defensive guys, your top faceoff guys out there against them. And that's part of what Shayne was saying. The attention to Aho's line is huge. And they're playing up against some big, heavy people, and they're pushing and shoving them like crazy. Now, I loved the discussion about putting Gostisbehere and Walker with those guys. Okay, and really, I really could see a difference with that.
I think that Katie's right though. Like it'll be those moments when you have a real offensive opportunity, because what Shayne was talking about with the matching the defensive pairs to the other team's line, that's important to remember. So like for instance, if there's an icing and it happens, New Jersey ices the puck when their fourth line is out, that's the ideal time to put the top line with Ghost and Walker out there. And I hope we see a lot of that kind of creativity going on, because that's exactly when you want them, because you've got the other guys' weaker line trapped out there. You don't have to worry about the defensive matchup as much. You can just get your offensive guys out there and try and score. And I hope that opportunistically, I hope that the team starts doing a lot of that, because I think that would be a huge, as we saw from that goal, I think that would be a huge way for them to get on the score sheet. So we'll see.
Yeah, and you know what? And we talked a little bit about this. I don't feel like throwing Walker and Gostisbehere creates a huge defensive liability at all.
No.
I think they've shown to be extremely strong in recent months, and particularly Ghost. I mean, he has surprised me with some of his great defensive play. And again, he's just playing hard. He's playing in your face. He's getting in the gaps. He's doing the right kind of things. So I think that's exciting. And I want to see the other guys get less ice time. They play the heavy minutes, as Shayne was saying. Of course, the first group usually over the boards on a penalty kill is Burns and Slavin, and we know. Look, Burns he's going to be in there. They're going to play him. He's playing 20 minutes a game. This is going to be hard as these series go along. And I think the more that Brind'Amour has confidence in that third pairing and kind of balances out the minutes a little bit where he can. I think it's going to be a smart move. So good stuff. Now, everything's going great, but the last game didn't start so well. It's one of those questions where, Rod loves to start on time, as we know. They didn't really start on time. What do we think about that, Katie?
Well, there's a saying out there that both teams have a say in the outcome, and I just think that New Jersey came out a little bit more determined, a little bit more hungry, and would we have liked to have seen the Canes give a little bit more pushback early? Sure, but despite letting in the early goal, they responded well. They stuck to their systems, their energy, their leaders brought the message and backed up that message with their play, and so there are going to be times where things don't go perfectly according to script, and as long as the team doesn't totally unravel when that happens, it's fine. Get back to the message, get back to the basics, and move forward. And that's exactly what the Canes did. It's why they were able to pull out a 2-1 win. That and Freddie. So, not too concerned.
No, I mean, I think you're right, and the one thing you have to remember is, I mean, this New Jersey team has got some very talented players. They've had a pretty strong season this year. Sheldon Keefe has changed the look and feel a little bit of the team. So they're not. It's not like you're just going to have an easy out. I mean, you're going to have some games where it's not going to be so easy. And heading into their barn, that they're going to be firing on all cylinders, and they've got some players who can hurt you in a hurry. So I think, again, kudos to the Canes for fighting back, and a great play by Ghost to get a goal, and then of course Martinook coming through. So it's going to be from all sides. You're going to need the committee, as Shayne calls it. We've talked a lot about that with the Canes this year. It's going to be by committee, and probably every night we're going to see somebody different. When they're winning, stepping up. But most importantly, of course, it's going to be goaltending. And right now, we have lots of reason to be optimistic because Freddie looks outstanding. He just looks great. So now, as we mentioned a minute ago, here we go. Game 3, out to the Rock. A tough part to play in, of course. How do we feel about these next 2 games? Do the Canes have to win one of these? Do we think they can? Aaron?
I think that they can. I don't know. I think, the way they're playing, they should have a chance to win any night. So I think that they could win both games if it came to that. I don't know. I will say, though, that one of the things people forget is that a sweep is actually a lot harder than you think. A lot of teams take the first 3 games, and then it takes them till game 5 or game 6 or even game 7 to complete. Because once the other team is desperate and facing elimination, a lot changes in how they're focused and what they're willing to sacrifice in order to try to win. So the ideal game for me would be for them to win game 3. I would love for them to win game 3. And then whether or not they win game 4 would just be up to whether they can close it out that fast. One of the things that we've talked about is the Canes' record on the road this season.
Yes.
And as we know, they went 16, 21, and 4 on the road. That's not a good record. If you simplify that to just wins and losses, it's 16 wins and 25 losses. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So I did a little something last night, way too late, looking at the statistics from those road losses just to see, like, where were we in the season, what was going on, who were the goaltenders, etc. Okay. They lost 1 road game in October. Just 1. That was it. So that one, we can even kind of put that one aside and look at the other 24. 12 of the other 24 games that they lost on the road were lost between the time that Freddie Andersen went out for knee surgery, and then that includes the time that Pyotr Kochetkov was also out with concussion protocol between November 23rd and December 3rd.
Right.
And when Freddie returned on January 17th. 12 of the 24, half of the road losses took place during that time, and 5 of the goaltenders in net for those 12 losses were either Spencer Martin or Dustin Tokarski.
Okay.
Now, when you look at that, you have to say, okay, you know what? They're really not as bad on the road as we think they are. Some of the late season road game losses after they had already clinched and after they had already clinched home ice for this first series,
you can't
even count those. You can't even look at those. Those don't even count.
Yeah.
If those 5 games with Martin or Tokarski had been played by Andersen and Kochetkov in their usual rotation, I think they would have won those 5. And then you're looking at a road record that's fairly similar to what they've done over the last few years. You're not looking at this terrible record.
Yeah.
So I think it's a kind of a narrative that we've all fallen into because it used to be a thing for the Canes, right? It used to be that they were bad on the road. It hasn't been that way for probably at least the last 3 years.
Yes, exactly.
If they've been just a little bit weaker, it's probably because of the changeover between the Shea and Pesce defensive pairing on the second pair and the time that it took to integrate the new defensive pairs. But surprisingly, that first early loss in October was the only road game they lost before Freddie was injured.
Yeah.
So I think that realistically, I'm actually more hopeful having looked at that because I don't think they've been as bad on the road as we think they have. I think they were impacted by, substandard goaltending, and that's nothing against Martin and Tokarski. They're great goaltenders in the AHL. They're actually fabulous, but they're not full-time NHL goaltenders, and anytime you have to rely on that, you're not in the same place. So I know I went on too long, but it was fascinating to me that it was that clear because I didn't expect it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I mean, for sure, the Canes are a team that's built to be able to be successful both at home and on the road. For sure they are. And because they play by committee, because, you have a lot of different folks who contribute, that gives you a real advantage. And I think you're right. I think, we're looking at it and we're saying, jeepers, that's a terrible record. But we're not used to that with the Canes, particularly with the last few years. They've been extremely good on the road. So I don't know. Katie, any thoughts?
Oh, pretty much right there along with what Aaron said. I think they can definitely take at least one of them. Hopefully it will be game 3 and really put them in the driver's seat. And then like Shayne was talking about, if they go up 3-0, it makes it all the easier to say, okay, let's rest Freddie. Let's give Pyotr a chance on Sunday. And then you're playing with house money Sunday. It feels like, I mean, you don't want to take anything for granted in the playoffs, sure. But the key for the Canes is going to be the hungrier team. Even being up 2-0, they want to be the ones to come out and say, this might not be our barn, but we're going to play like we're in our barn, and we're going to take it to New Jersey, and we are going to give them everything we've got and do our best to overwhelm them. Because where the Canes are going to get themselves into trouble is to say, well, we're just going to play our normal forechecking style and see what happens and then adjust from there. I don't want them to be reactive. I want them to be proactive in the way that they approach the games. And I think if they can be proactive and they go on the attack and they're the ones that make New Jersey have to adjust to them, they will put themselves in a really good position to win at least one, if not both of those games in New Jersey.
Well, and one of the big things that we're going to be looking for, of course, is that they start on time.
Yes.
If they can get out in front of the games, and I think you're right totally on this, Katie, that if they can get in front of these games, they make it very, very difficult for the other guys to prevail. And they get the crowd out of it. And that's in these playoffs, that's probably one of the biggest things. We've talked a lot about the manic crowd that goes on with the Caniacs in Lenovo Center. Not so much in some of the other barns. They can get you can neutralize them in a hurry. And I think if the Canes came in, and we know that the Devils are brittle, if they can come in and get a quick lead in this next game, it's going to be interesting. Okay, so let's look at closing comments. What do you got for us, Aaron?
I think that we're just excited to see what happens next. I think for me, I mean, one of the nice things about Friday night's game is that it's going to be at a reasonable time. That's something that the Canes have not had so far, and that I've heard. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that for the older players, it's especially difficult to have to constantly adjust their game day schedules. They're just so used to following that routine and getting that game day, So there were the usual jokes about, when the first period start didn't go so well about, oh, well, it's because they had to shorten their pregame nap, or, oh, they don't think the game starts till 7, So,
the first hour.
they just kind of missed the first hour, yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be, now it's a little bit later, I think, on Friday, isn't it? It's at 8, is it? But that's still within the realm of, it's a normal weekend game time that, so that'll be nice for those of us that are watching too, because it's been kind of fun trying to figure out how to watch these early games with these strange times and Easter Sunday and all the rest of it. So I'm excited. I want to see them win, and, I think it's going to go well.
What about you, Katie?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to see what they have to give on Friday. They're in a good place. They're building good momentum. They've, from the back forwards, from the goaltenders to the D, there's plenty to like and just a few places to nitpick and improve on. And I think if they improve on those areas, then they are going to be a whole lot more than the Devils can handle. So want to get through this quickly, decisively. If not in 4, no more than 5, because want to get the boys rested up and prepared and ready to go for the Capitals or the Canadiens if they were able to have some sort of comeback miracle, which would be fun. I wish I'd be able to be a fly on the wall in your house, Aaron, if that happened, because I know you would be absolutely torn having to watch both your teams play each other. It's a sweet joy and also very
the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, right?
Yes. But no matter which team they go against, if they're healthy and they're playing well and they've got a lot of good momentum, then no matter whether it's the Caps or the Habs, I think the Canes are in an excellent position to be very competitive in that series. If not, just go ahead and win it.
Yeah, and the advantage the Canes have right now is this New Jersey team is hurting. They could not ask for a better situation in terms of the fact that as it's turned out, some of their key players are out of the lineup, and that's an advantage for the Hurricanes. And I think, as you suggest, the sooner they can wrap this up, that's great. And I'm really hoping that your Habs, Aaron, can lay a beating for a couple of games with the.
At the very least, I want them to make it a long series. That would be to our benefit.
Yeah, at least take it to 6 games.
Absolutely.
For sure. I fully expect, and we know what it's going to be like, and in Montreal, the folks will just be they'll be crazy. And one of the things we've seen in Canada, and I've really appreciated this, is that they have as many fans outside at the rink looking up at the big screen as they do inside the rink. It's really something to behold. And I expect that we're going to see the same thing in Montreal. So hopefully that gives a boost to the team, and they can lay a couple of beatings on the Caps. And, so far watching the Caps, they are definitely beatable. And and I think, if the Canes can do quick measure, 5 or 6 games, wrap this up, let's move on, and get ready for the Caps. I think that's going to be great, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, so far so good. We wondered, trailing 1-0 the other night. I was a little bit taken aback after that first period. I was kind of anxious a little bit, but they showed their mettle. And don't forget, a lot of these folks have a lot of playoff action. And that's the other thing we haven't really talked about, is that they've got a lot of playoff experience. And boy, the ones that have been with the Canes for a while, they're grumpy.
Coming into the playoffs, the Carolina Hurricanes members of the roster for this year had, if my math was correct, and that's always an if, had a combined 1,111 playoff games of experience.
Huge.
And to compare that, the Montreal Canadiens had less than 400. It was like 395. So that is, we have, the Canes are in a great place with players that have played in the playoffs before, and they know what it takes. And I think the only other thing I would add that I want to see on for these next 2 games in New Jersey, can we please score some power play goals? I'd like that very much.
Well, we've talked a lot about special teams in the past. We know how important those are in the playoffs to kill the penalties, which the Canes did, and then get a shorthanded goal. And they've also had a power play goal. This is what will separate them from the other guys. And I think you're right. And I've been encouraged by the power play, as I mentioned earlier. And for sure, our PK is as good as it gets. So we're going to be in pretty good shape. And can't wait for Friday night.
I know.
For the next episode, for sure. And as always, ladies, it was great. It was fun to have Shayne on board with us today and talk Canes hockey. And I know we'll have him back as things progress here later on in the series. So that's excellent. For those of you who've been listening or watching, of course, Aaron, Katie, and I are delighted you've been with us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. If you have any comments or just want to say hi, or you've got some thoughts about us or the Hurricanes, please put those in the comment section down below. And finally, if you want to be alerted of future episodes of stormTracker, please press the subscribe and the bell button, and we'll make sure that you are aware as soon as those are available. As always, Aaron, Katie, and I thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to getting together soon right here on stormTracker.